This is Bruce Jacobs. I'm the director of the Intermountain Combined Federal Campaign, and we're here to train nonprofits about how to apply for the 2016 CFC. So let me start the slideshow now. Okay, our objectives today are to do a quick CFC 101, explain what the campaign is and how it works. And we're going to take you step by step through the application process, and we certainly are interested in any questions or feedback that you may have. So I do encourage you to pipe up and ask questions, though, not only to help yourself but others that may have the same question on the call or later on. I'll try to get to you in the chat room if you have a message you'd like to say on the keyboard, but if I don't see it, just go ahead and speak up. Okay, so just as a reminder, the Combined Federal Campaign is the only authorized fundraising vehicle for federal government employees. So there's really only one way for us to try to get their attention and raise money for charities, and that's through the Combined Federal Campaign. I sometimes get questions about whether or not this is a grant, and the answer is no. You're not applying for a grant when you apply to the CFC. You're applying to be listed as one of many nonprofit organizations that federal employee donors can choose to support through the CFC. Currently, there are about 130 CFCs in the United States and overseas. So the campaign's broken down into different geographic regions, and Intermountain CFC is one of those regions. They've been merging quite a bit the past few years, so I think by next year we'll probably be down to around 50 or so. And CFC is billed as one of the largest and most successful campaigns in the country. We do raise around $200 million every year for nonprofits. Here in the Intermountain CFC, it's not quite that much, but it is around $2 million. The campaign itself runs from September 1st through the 15th of December generally, unless there's an extension. So that is the active solicitation period. And then outside of those dates are when we're applying to be in the CFC, preparing the materials and the planning and so forth. But the campaign is actually run between September 1 and December 15th. It's just a quick map of the Intermountain CFC territory. As of this year, we just added Montana. So we've grown quite a bit and merged over the years. I think we're probably done with the merging process after this year. We're about as big as we need to be. But that's just a quick visual. Here's the structure of the CFC. It's overseen and regulated by the Office of Personnel Management, which is basically the HR arm of the federal government. But then at the local level, each local CFC has what's called a local federal coordinating committee. And this is akin to what you have as an executive board of directors for your nonprofit. They're the ones that I report to and they oversee our local campaign. They set our budget. They approve our plans and tactics for running the campaign. On the left, you see a box called Principal Combined Fund Organization. That is the nonprofit that each of these local campaigns must partner with in order to make the campaign tax deductible for donors. So the PCFO, as it's called, is the nonprofit organization that is tasked with administering and the campaign, training volunteers, dispersing funds, and so forth. In this case, for the Intermountain CFC region, the PCFO is United Way of Northern Utah. And then, of course, what the campaign is all about is helping you, the local, national, and in some cases international nonprofits who apply. On the call today, I'm sure it's just local charities because we're talking about the local Intermountain CFC application. Any questions on the structure before I move on? Okay, I'm getting, I got a message that I might be cutting out a little bit. If necessary, I will switch to the phone instead of my computer speakers. But if everybody will put themselves on mute for the time being, that could help out. But keep me posted if it becomes too difficult to hear. The charities who participate in the CFC must all be 501c3 organizations. I'm sure that applies to all of you. And I do want to let you know that this is an annual application process currently. That might change in the future, but as of right now, it's not apply once and you're in forever. You do have to reapply to the campaign every year in order to be listed in that year's CFC brochure and on the website. In order to be accepted into the campaign, you do have to go through a review process, which is why we have this application training here today, in order to confirm that you're abiding by sound financial and governance practices. So we'll get into that as we go through the training. This is the cycle of the CFC. So this is the time of year at the top here when nonprofit organizations apply to be listed into the fall 2000 CFC. After you apply, we review your applications in late March or early April, and then you're notified usually by mid to late April about your application status, whether you were approved or disapproved. In most cases, it's approved. Then federal employees promote and run the campaign, as I said, in the fall, and the donors select which charities they want to support. And then following the campaign, at the beginning of the next calendar year, that's when we collect all the money and begin to distribute it on a quarterly basis. Now, most federal employees are giving by payroll deduction, so we make 4 quarterly distributions after the campaign is run. Just to give you an example, we just wrapped up the 2015 campaign, and we're actually still in the process of entering some of those pledge forms, and we're in the process of beginning to collect the first month's payroll. So we'll collect that for the first 3 months or so, and then we make the first charitable distribution for the 2015 campaign by April 1st of this year. So for the 2016 campaign, which is what you're applying for right now, we'll make the first distribution of that campaign by April of 2017, and then 3 more payments following that. Any questions on the CFC cycle before I continue? Okay. There are 3 types of applications. I believe that basically everybody on this call today, we're talking about the local independent organizations, or you might be a member of a federation such as the United Way or Community Health Charities or Community Shares. A federation is basically an umbrella group of charities that band together for marketing purposes and so forth. But their members have the very same application as independent organizations. Now, federations themselves, here in item 2, like a large United Way or a Community Health Charities, if you have 15 or more eligible member groups, you can apply as a federation, and that has a slightly different application. But again, I don't think currently we have any federations on the call today. And then the third type, I don't think will apply to anyone listening currently, but if you are an organization that runs on a military installation, you're probably what's called a Family Support and Youth Activities, or FSYA, organization, and they have sort of a special status with the CFC, and they have a slightly different application that they have to fill out. So we're really going to focus on this first application type today, because that's going to be what most of you are going to have to complete. Before we get into the step-by-step process, I do want to just share a few helpful tips with you. Where can you find the application? I'm going to leave the slides for a moment and show you where. Go into our website, intermountaincfc.org. If you come under this menu at the top called For Charities, and then click on Applications and Instructions, you'll scroll down a bit, and under Local Independent Organizations and Members of Federations, the first the first download link is the 2016 Local Independent Application. I'm going to go ahead and download that right now and open it up for you, and this is what you'll do as well. Unfortunately, it's not an online application, so you will need to print this and fill it out manually and submit a paper copy to us. Now, the first 8 or 9 pages or so of this document are all instructions. I do recommend that even though we're going through the training today, that you take a close look at these and make sure that you're following those instructions as you fill out the application. But what you're actually going to turn into us will begin on page 8, the 2016 application for local independent organizations. The first page, you'll just fill out basic information about your organization. The CFC number, every organization that is admitted into the campaign is assigned a unique 5-digit code for their nonprofit. And that is your CFC number. That's the number that federal employees will use when they want to select your organization and make a financial contribution to you. If you're brand new to the CFC, this number will be assigned to you shortly after we receive your application. So you don't need to put it on the paper unless you've been admitted into the campaign before. In that case, put in your 5-digit CFC number. And then the application really gets underway on page 9, and we're going to get to that in just a moment. The bare minimum requirements to be an eligible nonprofit for the CFC is, first of all, that you do have 501c3 tax-exempt status. I'm sure that applies to everybody on the call today. However, there are multiple reasons why your 501c3 status may have been revoked without your knowledge. A common reason is that nonprofits occasionally move. They'll go to a new address. But if the IRS sends a letter to your old address and it comes back as undeliverable, then they will automatically remove you from their master list of 501c3 organizations. And there's other reasons similar to that if they haven't received documents from you for a while. So I really recommend that at least once a year, and maybe you can use CFC application time as a reason, that you give the IRS a call and just double check to make sure that you're still listed as a 501c3 organization. Because if we receive your application, everything may look great, we may be all ready to approve you, and then find out that you're not on the IRS master list, and that really becomes a headache at that point, because it takes a little while to get you reinstated depending on what the problem is. The second requirement is that you need to be open, what we call open for business, a minimum of 15 hours per week. That means that you are conducting services, or you're available for the public who are seeking assistance a minimum of 15 hours per week. And that's usually not a problem for most organizations. We do require that you have a dedicated phone line and a physical address for your organization. You cannot satisfy this requirement just on the basis of a PO box or an address that is associated with a UPS store or something of that nature. However, it doesn't necessarily have to be your own building. It could even be just a dedicated portion of a residence, and that's fairly common. So the phone line does not have to be a landline per se. It could be a cell phone. There's no problem with that, as long as it's dedicated specifically for your organization and isn't just your personal line. Every nonprofit that applies to the CFC has to provide to us a copy of their 990 tax form. Now, we recognize that there are several organizations, churches, for example, and certain organizations who don't meet the revenue threshold for having to fill out a Form 990. So if that's the case, if you filled out a 990 Easy or a 990T, that's great. But for the purposes of your CFC application, we're then going to require that you complete what we call a 990 pro forma. That basically means a partial 990 using the full 990 tax form, but you don't have to complete all of it. And usually it's fairly easy to just take the information that has already been compiled on your 990 EZ and transfer that over to the specific sections of the ProForma 990 that we need to see. So I'm going to instruct you with more detail how to do that, if that applies to you. Organizations who report over $100,000 in revenue must have an audit by a certified public accountant. Unfortunately, we cannot accept a review in place of an audit. So if your annual revenues exceed $100,000, and we need an audit. I'm told that starting with the 2017 campaign, that the threshold to require an audit will be raised to $250,000, which will be good news for many of our smaller nonprofits. However, this year we do still require that you certify to have an audit if your revenues exceed $100,000. Some of the key application dates. This year, the application deadline is March 16th. If you're an independent nonprofit, we need to have your application in hand by that date. We can't accept postmarked by. So we need to have received it by the 16th of March. If you're a member of a federation like a Community Shares or Health Charities or United Way or something like that, they may have an earlier deadline for you to submit this application to them, because if you're a member of a federation, you're going to submit your CFC application to the federation, and then they're going to compile all those and then send us a federation application. So if that applies to you, please check with your federation to find out what the internal deadline is. It will be earlier than March 16th. Our LFCC has to notify you in writing by the 30th of April what the decision is, whether you're accepted, which is usually the case, or denied. There is an appeals process in that case, and these other dates would apply if there is reason for appeal. All right, any questions before I move on? Okay. Along with your application, there are 4 or possibly 5 required attachments. So you'll fill out the main pages are basically checking boxes and filling out some blanks in the paper. But then along with some of those certification statements, we require some attachments. And I'll go into the detail of those. But Attachment A is a documentation of your local presence, the services that you delivered in the past calendar year. Attachment B would be a copy of your letter from the IRS stating that you are a 501c3 organization, and that's called an IRS determination letter. Attachment C is your audit. Again, as I mentioned earlier, if you have over $100,000 in revenue, you have to certify that you have an audit. However, you don't actually have to provide a copy of that audit unless your revenue is $250,000 or greater. Next year, as I said before, I think they're going to raise that audit threshold, so you don't have to certify having one unless you're over $250,000. But as of this year, you have to have one if you're over 100, and if you're over 250, then you have to supply a copy of it. Now, having said that, our LFCC does have in its discretion the power to request your audit if you're over $100,000 and they decide for one reason or another that they want to see it. So I do recommend that you make sure that you've got it ready and all in order. Attachment D would be your IRS Form 990 or your ProForma 990 if you're not required by the IRS to submit the 990. And Attachment E is fairly simple. It's a 25-word statement that you come up with that basically describes who your organization is and what you do. And that is the statement that we will publish along with your name and CFC 5-digit number in our official CFC charity list this fall. And that is both a printed publication and it's made available to be searched online. This last bullet isn't something you'll have to worry about currently with your application, but we do have a pilot project underway whereby you can write more or less a paragraph or more, 1,000 characters, thanking donors who choose your organization. So if you provide to us a thank you statement along with some information about what your organization does and what you intend to do with the donor's contribution, then we can make that available to all donors who select your organization if they give online. So that's intended to hopefully create a better connection between you and the donor, because we don't release donor names unless they specifically authorize us to do so. But this way, although you wouldn't get the donor's name necessarily, you would have an opportunity to thank them. So I'll provide more information about that at a later date. I just wanted to make you aware of it. Before we get into the step-by-step application process, I wanted to just let you know what the most common mistakes we see on the application, what those are. First of all, that the application is submitted but not signed. On the very last page of the application, there's a line where an officer needs to sign and date it, so double check that. Sometimes we see incorrect attachments or attachments that are missing information. For example, charities will often submit a 990 EZ when what we really need is a pro forma 990. Again, I'll explain how to fill out one of those. Sometimes charities will submit a review in place of an audit when they're required to have a full audit if you're over 100,000. This next one is highly common because many of you have your 990 prepared by your CPA, which is great. But unless we have an actual signature of an officer of the organization, because you usually will sign the first copy and turn it into the IRS, and then you'll have several copies available, and that's what you'll send to the CFC. But you need to make sure that you've got a signature on that 990. Now, if you e-filed, there's an e-file page, and you can submit that in place, but again, it does have to have a signature because there's a line for a signature on the e-file page. So somewhere we've got to see it either on the e-file page or on page 1 of your 990. The AFR stands for Administrative and Fundraising Rate, and that is essentially how much of your revenue goes to overhead costs as opposed to program. And you're going to calculate that AFR using the 990 or the pro forma 990 based on the information you provide there. And we often see charities that basically just make a math error or miscalculate their administrative and fundraising rate. It's not the end of the world. We just have to go back and have you correct it before we can proceed. Attachment A, I'll explain in more detail, but often we'll see too generalized information on the attachment A, where the charity will say, this is who we are and what we do, but what we really need to see on that attachment is what did you accomplish in the previous calendar year. And I'll speak to that in more detail in just a moment. And then this last one, on the first page of your 990, there's a line where it asks for how many voting members of the board do you have. And then on page 7 of the 990, you have to list those board members, and we'll often see a discrepancy in the numbers of people listed versus the number that was displayed on page 1. I'll speak to that in more detail in just a moment too, but that's a very common mistake. Okay. One last thing before we start going through the items one by one. I'm often asked by nonprofits, what can I do to maximize my CFC contributions? Because we have the campaign in part so that federal employees can be solicited just once a year by all nonprofits rather than having charities knock on their door throughout the year. So you can't just go soliciting federal employees in the workplace. That's why we have the CFC. But we do have kickoff events and launch events, and if you're invited by a local federal agency to come and speak as part of their internal CFC kickoff, that's great. But we also have regional kickoffs that we handle, and we invite many charities to participate in those, where you can have a booth and meet the volunteers and some of the federal employees who are looking to support different nonprofits. For example, if you're in the Utah area, we have a large kickoff event in usually late September, early October at Hill Air Force Base, and we can host up to 50 local nonprofits. So if you have the opportunity, that's a great way to get your name and organization in front of potential donors. You are welcome and encouraged to use your own website, your social media, your own brochures, pamphlets, anything you do marketing-wise for your organization. We encourage you to put the CFC logo on those things and let them know what your CFC number is, so that any federal employees who happen to come across your website or your information can be alerted that they can support you through their workplace campaign. We do have some CFC approved charity stickers, or little decals that you can hang up in your office window. That they basically, it has the logo, and you can put it right in your 5-digit number, and you can hang that up so that any visitors to your organization can see that you're supported by the Combined Federal Campaign. And then we do have many donors who like to release their name and information to the charities. There's a place on the pledge form where they can do that, and then we provide that information to you when we make the first distribution, and you have an opportunity then to send them a thank you. Any questions before we dive right into the application itself? Okay. All right. Let's download the document and get started. So we're gonna turn really quick again to page 1, or sorry, item 1. It's page 9 of the application, where it asks you to certify that you have a local presence. And here in the middle of the page, you need to put your office address or the service office address. So if your headquarters is located outside our campaign area, you would not be eligible to apply to Intermountain CFC unless you have an office within the campaign, within our territory. That's a great big geographic region, as I showed you, that does deliver services within this organization. So that's the address that you're going to put down here, the address where services are conducted or delivered, or where people can come seeking assistance. And then beneath that, you're going to list your hours of operation according to this example here. You'll list that right here. And then your organization's dedicated phone number and the county and state where your office is located. Along with that, you will provide attachment A at the back of the application. So this attachment is a description of the health and human welfare services, or the benefits or the assistance that you provided in the previous calendar year. So in this case, 2015. And it has to have been provided within our local region, as I mentioned. We frequently get descriptions from charities that say, our mission is this, and this is what we offer, and this is what we do. But that would not be sufficient. What we're looking for is more or less quantitative data, like how many people did you serve, what was the form of that assistance, where did it take place, who was it delivered by. In order to help you do this, I really strongly recommend that you use a template that we have available here. Right underneath the local independent application where we downloaded the app, you can click on this attachment A template and download that. Just it takes a few seconds, and then this will give you more instructions. And then if you scroll into the next page, basically a table format or a narrative format if you prefer, but this will walk you through what we're looking for. It doesn't have to be long. So, one page will suffice for this, but it does have to have sufficient detail that we can see that that you did provide valuable services to significant numbers of people in the previous calendar year. So again, I strongly recommend you use this attachment A template, and then it makes it easier for our eligibility committee to quickly just look over it and make sure that that you've satisfied the requirements for this attachment. Okay. Application item 2 is on the next page of the application, page 10. You're going to simply check the box to certify that you are an IRS tax-exempt organization with a 501c3 determination. And then as attachment B, the next attachment behind A, you need to provide a copy of that IRS determination letter. Now, if you're a chapter or affiliate of a national organization, or if you're part of a group exempt determination by the IRS, so usually it's like one big charity that has many different chapters or affiliates, then you're going to have to provide a little bit of additional information. Or if your organization, if the name on your 501c3 letter from the IRS, if that name differs from the name that you put on your application to the CFC, then what we need to see is a document, and it's usually from the state you're located in, that is what we call a DBA, or a doing business as document, that basically authorizes the legal entity recognized by the IRS to do business or conduct services under this trade name or other name that you may have. And it's fairly common for a charity to be incorporated under one legal name and then later on decide that using this different name is better for marketing purposes. But in order to do that, you need to not only provide the official IRS letter, but a document that that certifies that you are allowed to do business under that different name. Okay, so if you move on to item 3 on page 11, let's just go back to the application really quick. There's 3 options here under this certification statement. You're either A, you certify that your organization is not part of a group exemption. That is probably going to be the case for the majority of you. You will select A. That means you have your own IRS letter. They recognize you. You're not affiliated. You're not a local chapter of a national, or you're not part of a group exemption. But if you are part of a group exemption from the IRS, then you select this second box. And then in addition to your letter from the IRS, we need to see on that letter the 4-digit group exemption code and a current list of all the subordinates that are covered by the group exemption. And then we would have to see your name as one of those subordinates that is part of that group exemption on that list. So be aware that if you're checking this item 2, or the second option under item 3, that is an additional requirement. Similarly, if you are a local chapter of a national organization, in addition to the IRS letter to the national organization, we need to have a letter from the CEO or equivalent officer stating specifically that your local organization is a bona fide chapter or affiliate in good standing with the national organization, and that you are covered under their 501c3 tax exemption and their IRS Form 990 and audited financial statements. One thing that you need to know about this letter is it must be dated October 1st, 2015 or later. So it either has to be dated this year or late last fall, after the 1st of October 2015. So it needs to be a fairly recent letter. Okay, moving on. Let's skip that. Item 4 is fairly self-explanatory, and there's no attachment required with this, but you're just simply going to check the box certifying that you are a human health and welfare organization. Now, I just want to underscore that although you may be an animal-related charity or perhaps an environment-related charity, we still do consider that to be human health and welfare, because the impact of those services certainly do have a positive effect on human well-being. So we do take a very broad stance when it comes to that. However, in your attachment A, it wouldn't hurt for you to simply include a sentence or so that makes that connection between the services that, let's say you're a humane society, the services that you provide to animals and their positive impact on humans. But that would be all that really would be required there. And then from then on, you could just go on to list the services delivered, number of cats spayed or neutered and adopted out to families or what have you, just as an example. Okay. Item 5 is on the next page, page 13. I'm going to go to that for a moment. Here we are on page 13, and you'll notice that once again, there are 3 options. You just need to select one of these. The first option is if your organization reports more than $250,000 in revenue on your Form 990 to the IRS, that you do account for your funds according to generally accepted accounting principles using the accrual basis of accounting, and that you have an independent certified public accountant audit your organization. And then for attachment C, in addition to checking this box, you will provide a copy of that audit, as I mentioned before. Now, if your revenues fall between $100,000 and $250,000, you're certifying to the exact same things and you're checking this box, the only difference being that you don't actually have to provide a copy of the auditor's report unless our LFCC contacts you and says, we want to see it. If your organization has less than $100,000 in revenue on your IRS Form 990 or the Pro Forma 990 that you fill out, then you will check this third box, and in that case, there is no attachment C required. Okay, so I just covered the next 2 slides here, so we're going to move on to application item 6 on page 14. Oh, excuse me, I went to the wrong slide, I'm sorry. We're almost back. Okay. On item 6, there are 2 options. Let's just go back to the application really fast. You're going to select one of the following 2 options. On option number 1 is that you're saying that you do prepare a full 990 and you submit it to the IRS, and you're going to provide as attachment D a copy of that Form 990. And it has to be fairly recent. It has to be for a period, as it says here, ending not more than 18 months prior to January 2016. What that means is that we can't accept a 990 that would be older than June 30th of 2014. If it's June 30th, 2014 or later, then that is within the 18 months and is an acceptable date range. So you'll provide a full copy of that 990. Or if you do not have to provide a full 990 to the IRS, let's say you do a 990 EZ, you're checking this box to say that you don't have to submit one to the IRS, but for the CFC purpose, you're going to complete a Pro Forma 990. In either case, whether it's a full 990 or a Pro Forma 990, please make sure that this document is signed by an officer of the organization. And this is what the signature block looks like at the bottom of page 1. So right here needs to be signed. So let's go back here for a moment. Okay. Another thing you're certifying in this statement is that you have a board of directors that doesn't have a conflict of interest, a majority of them are uncompensated by your organization. Okay. Now, let's say that you don't turn in a full 990 to the IRS, you do the 990 easy or T, or maybe you don't have to submit anything to the IRS. In that case, what we need to have you do is go to irs.gov and you can search for Form 990 there, and you'll find it really quickly, and you're going to download Form 990. And you're going to complete certain sections of the 990. Now, even if this doesn't apply to your organization, I want you to pay attention as I go through this on our website, because these are the areas of the 990 where we're going to pay particular attention. So here you can download an example of the areas of the 990 that we need to see. So I'm going to download this, and it's going to have highlighted in yellow the certain sections of the 990 that need to be completed. So one moment. Okay. Here we've got one that happens to be the 2014 version, but it may very well be 2015. As long as the ending date is June 30th, 2014 or later, then you're just fine. If you're doing a pro forma, we often see organizations simply write pro forma across the top. That means we quickly know, okay, they selected the second option and they didn't submit this to the IRS. We're just looking at this. The first section needs to be filled out, basically who you are and that you're 501c3. And then we're paying particular attention to line 3 on page 1, where you state the number of voting members of your governing body, board of directors, or so forth. And then we're going to check that against page 7. So, but before we move on, once again, please make sure that this document is signed. Then you get to skip pages 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6 for those of you who are doing the pro forma. And here on page 7, you're going to list the names of the members of your governing board. So the number of people you listed on page 1, line 3 should correspond to the number of people listed here who also have a check mark under column C in one of these first 2 boxes, which means that they're an individual trustee or director, or that they're an institutional trustee. So we're going to count the number of people listed here who have check marks in one of these first 2 columns. And if that number is less than the number we saw on page 1, line 3, that's that discrepancy that I was speaking of earlier, where we have to go back to you and say, can you explain why you have fewer people listed on your board than you say you did on page 1 of the 990. It's fine if you have more, because often you're going to list other types of officers or key employees. So if this number exceeds the line on page 3, that's not a problem. But if it is less than, then we're going to have to come back to you. Another common error I see is that the columns D, E, and F are the compensation columns, and they will often not be filled out, which generally means that you didn't compensate them. However, if we don't see zeros in this box, then we're not allowed to make the assumption that they didn't receive any compensation. Sometimes there will be nothing listed here, and as long as this box is checked saying that no one here received any compensation, then that suffices. But if that's left unchecked and there's a bunch of people listed here, we need to see the actual amounts of compensation they received, even if that amount is 0. So please don't neglect to fill this out. Now let's say your preparer, your CPA, didn't do this quite right. Again, this is a pro forma 990, and this is for the purposes of the CFC. It's not something you have to resubmit to the IRS. You just need to make sure it's filled out correctly. So it's fine if you want to go ahead and take a pen and complete this correctly, because you're certifying on the application and with your signature on this form that the document you're sending to us is truthful. Okay, then this next item is that if you have more than 14 members, you can continue to list them on subsequent pages. But then you get to stop here after line 5 and you get to skip. Okay, and then page 9, you're going to fill out to the best of your ability using the information from your 990EZ or just the information that you have on hand. But what we're really looking for is that there's a number here on line 12, column A, the total revenue. This is how much money your organization took in for the period covered by your 990. And then you fill out page 10, which is a listing of your organization's expenses. And again, fill this out to the best of your ability. But again, what we're really looking for is that there's a number on line 25, columns C and D, which are your management and general expenses and your fundraising expenses. And these are the three numbers, these two plus the total revenue on the previous page, that you will use to calculate your administrative and fundraising rate. We'll talk about that in just a moment, but it's a fairly simple application calculation. Then you get to skip page 11 and half of page 12. You just need to come to part 12 on page 12, and what we're primarily looking for here is that you specify the method of accounting your organization used. So if you're over $100,000 in revenue, it has to be accrual, or that would be a basis for denial, because otherwise you would not be in conformance with generally accepted accounting principles. However, if your organization reports less than $100,000 on this Form 990, then it is acceptable for you to use the cash or other method of accounting, because in that case you're certifying that you do have controls in place to make sure that money's being accounted for properly. Okay, so hopefully that cleared things up and didn't make it more confusing. If you have any questions on your 990 or your pro forma 990, please don't hesitate to contact me. I'll go back to the slides. This is basically walking you through what I just did. So we'll skip to item 7, which is on page 15. This is your administrative and fundraising rate. Now this is a lot of verbiage down here, but it's basically saying what I was just showing you, that you're going to take the amounts on page 10 of your 990, your management and general expenses. You're going to add that to your total fundraising expenses. Again, that's line 25, column C and column D. And then you're going to go back a page to your total revenue on line 12, column A, that number. So you're going to add these two together, and the sum of those two numbers will be divided by your total revenue. And that will give you your administrative and fundraising rate. What it's actually going to give you is a big long decimal string starting with 0.4211, whatever it might be. You actually move the decimal 2 places to the right, and that is your administrative and fundraising rate. And we spell that out pretty clearly on the form itself. So if you have any questions on how to do that calculation, feel free to contact me. The good news is for the rest of the items 8 through 12, there is no corresponding attachment. So you're simply checking boxes from this point on. Item 8, you're checking the box to certify that you do have an active and responsible governing body without a conflict of interest. And that's why we check page 7 and page 1 of your 990 fairly carefully to make sure that that is in place. Item 9, you will simply check the box to certify that you promise your organization will not sell or lease the names of any CFC contributors who authorize us to give you their names and contact information. Item 10, you're certifying that your organization is conducting publicity and promotional activities based on actual programs and operations. Basically, that you're doing what actually doing what you claim to be doing, and not doing something else shady in the background. Item 11 is very similar to item 10, but you're checking the box to certify that the money you raised will actually be used for what you say you're going to use it for. So that's fairly straightforward. And item 12 is you're certifying your organization is not secretly affiliated with or sending money to any illegal terrorist groups, which I'm sure is not the case. Make sure then that at the very end of the application that you sign it and you date it. And then we're going to ask for one last attachment. Attachment E will be your 25-word statement explaining who your organization is and what you do. It does have to be 25 words exactly or less. We cannot exceed 25 words. If you send us a statement that is more than 25 words long, then we will edit it for you until it's 25 words. So we don't have the time and means to go back to hundreds and hundreds of different organizations and ask them to resubmit it. We're just going to edit it for you, and so you take your chances if you send us a statement that's longer than that. We'll do our best, but I recommend that you keep to that word limit. You'll notice that after this example sentence that there are 3 random capital letters here. These are called taxonomy codes that correspond to basic categories of service. So let's go back to the application really fast. And I want to show you where you can find those codes. On the last page of the instructions, so back on page 7, no, excuse me, page 6 of the instructions, you'll find an A through Z taxonomy code listing. So you're going to read through these and find the letter that corresponds to the category of organization that best fits who you are and what you do. You're allowed to select 3, and we recommend that you select the 3 that make the most sense and include those at the end of your 25-word statement. The reason for doing this is that sometimes sometimes our federal employees, rather than searching the charity list by name, they might search by these categories and say, hey, show me all the medical research charities under H, or show me all the youth development charities under O. And if you haven't picked 3 that correspond to you, then you may not come up in that search string. A good way to do this is, again, coming back to our website, you can download an attachment E template. Again, it's not required, but we do recommend that you use this template to complete your attachment E, because it will walk you through it has, again, a repeat. You can quickly see here what all those taxonomy codes are. You can put them in up here, and then you type in your 25-word statement along with your organization name here. So just to make sure that we have all the information that we need, it's a good idea to use this attachment E template. It's very simple and straightforward. Okay, I showed you already where you can download the application and instructions. I will be posting this video. There's another video to a tutorial that OPM puts out. Please just make sure that you're completing all the certifications, that you're signing it. Here under item 6, this is something that I also recommend that you do. It will help you to make sure that you're not making mistakes. So if you click this link that says 2016 self-checklist, this gives you an opportunity to walk back through your application step by step and just make sure that you have completed everything correctly. Little hint, this checklist looks remarkably similar to the very same checklist that our eligibility committee will be using as they go through your application. So they have one that looks a whole lot like this, and they're checking these boxes to make sure that, yes, you're in compliance with every one of those certification statements and that your attachments are correct and in order and according to the appropriate dates and so forth. So what we strongly recommend is that you print this out and do this yourself, and then submit a copy of this on the top of your application. It's not required, but it is strongly recommended. I find that organizations that take the extra time to do this step generally have either no or many fewer mistakes on their application. usually none. Okay, now you're going to, once you've got the applications ready to go, you're going to mail it to the Intermountain CFC office in your area, depending on where you're located. So if you're in Utah, Wyoming, or Colorado, unless you're in Teton County, Wyoming, any of those states, you're going to send the applications to me here in Ogden, Utah, at this address. If you're in Southwest Idaho or in Malheur County, Oregon, you're going to send your application to Jonathan Kreutz in Boise at this address. If you're in Southeast Idaho, which is anything east of Twin Falls, if you're in Twin Falls or west, you're going to send it to Jonathan. If you're east of Twin Falls and Southeast Idaho, you're going to send yours to Jan O'Gilvy at the U.S. Department of Energy. She's a member of our LFCC and sits on our eligibility committee, and she reviews the applications for this part of our territory, including Teton County, Wyoming. If your organization is in Montana, the newest state we've added to Intermountain CFC, your application will go to Lisa Andis in Great Falls, Montana at this address. And at that point, we're finished with the application review. What questions do you have now that I can answer for you? Oh, looks like I might have missed one in the chat. If the board membership has changed since the 990 and does not match the list on part 1, is that okay? Yes, it's okay. However, along with your 990 that you submit to us, you will need to include a letter or a short statement, preferably signed, that explains why that difference. For example, you know, we've had 2 members resign since we did this, and so, you know, we listed fewer on the 990 than is listed on page 1. Although since it covers that period, you really want to, in most cases, make sure that you do include the names of board members who may have since resigned if they were active during the period of your 990. So hopefully that makes sense. Someone was asking, she missed what was the letter had to be dated by October 1st, 2015. That is only if your organization is a local chapter of a national affiliate. Then as part of your attachment B, we need a letter from the CEO or equivalent officer of your national organization that states that your organization, your local organization, is a member in good standing, is a bona fide affiliate, and is covered by their 501c3 tax exemption and their audited financial statements. If you have a site on Teton County, Wyoming, but also one in Sweetwater, Casper, Laramie, and Gillette, do you send the application? In that case, most likely wherever the majority of your services have taken place, then you would send the application to that area. In this case, unless you're headquartered in Teton County and provide most of your services there, I would send it to the application to our attention in Ogden. So the Ogden, Utah application. But really, in that case, either one would probably be just fine. Any other questions? Okay, thank you very much for joining today. Again, these slides are posted on the website, and I will be posting the recording to the website as well. So you're welcome to go back and review those. Please don't hesitate to contact me or your local CFC representative in one of our other states if you have any questions about the application. We're here to help. We want you to be successful. We're trying to get as many eligible nonprofits into the campaign as possible, and it really is all about you and the service and the support that hopefully we can provide to you through the combined federal campaign. So once again, thank you very much, and I hope you all have a wonderful day.